All right, welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving straight into one of the most talked about, heavily scrutinized historical connections of our time, the relationship between Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump. And look, we're not here to traffic in rumors or internet gossip. We are going to unpack exactly what the recently unsealed court documents actually reveal, focusing 100% on the facts. So, to really wrap our heads around this massive story of secrets, power, and time, we just gotta ask ourselves one incredibly direct question. What do these highly publicized documents truly reveal? Now, you already know this topic has been a massive lightning rod for years. But today, we're bypassing all that endless speculation. We're looking directly at the hard evidence to separate what people think happened from what the official records actually say. Part 1. The New York Elite. Okay, to really set the scene here, we have to rewind back to New York City in the 1980s and 90s. We're talking an era of massive wealth, towering skyscrapers, and ridiculously exclusive parties. And in this very specific elite social bubble, Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein definitely occupied the same VIP spaces. But, they actually had sharply contrasting profiles. Trump was already a household name, highly visible, building these massive hotels and casinos. Epstein, on the flip side, was incredibly rich but super mysterious. He was this private financier, and honestly, his wealth was barely understood even by the people right there in his orbit.
But they definitely crossed paths. Take a look at this quote from a 1990s interview. It really captures the public nature of their dynamic back then. Trump literally called Epstein a terrific guy and casually mentioned that Epstein liked beautiful women as much as he did. Now, obviously, looking back today, we view those words through a totally different, much darker lens. But it's really important to remember that in that specific era, way before the horrific reality of Epstein's actions came to light, this kind of social friendship seemed pretty standard for two mega-rich guys running in that New York scene.
Part 2. Crimes, Arrests, and Death.
Well, that shiny facade of 1990s wealth completely shattered when the awful truth about Epstein finally started bubbling up. If we look at the timeline, back in 2005, police in Florida started getting reports from young girls saying Epstein had abused them. And that eventually led to his first major arrest in 2008. But here's the crazy part. Instead of facing real, severe justice, Epstein somehow scored this sweetheart deal. He pleaded guilty to minor charges and got a shockingly light punishment of just 13 months in jail. I mean, it stands out as an absolute, glaring failure of the system. Thankfully, victims and investigative journalists absolutely refused to let it go, which ultimately led to his big trafficking arrest in New York in 2019.
Which brings us right to August 2019. While he was sitting there awaiting trial on these incredibly serious charges, Epstein was officially declared dead by suicide in his prison cell. It was this sudden, totally shocking end that instantly sparked massive public doubt. People all over the world were asking, wait, how does this happen in a high-security facility? And almost overnight, his death ignited a fierce demand for answers about who else might have been involved in his whole network.
Part 3. Unsealing the documents. So with Epstein dead, the criminal trial against him abruptly ended. The fight for justice had to transition entirely to the paper trail he left behind. And when we talk about the Epstein files, what we're actually talking about are sealed documents. We mean court records, emails, phone logs, and witness statements that were legally locked away from the public. For literally years, victims and journalists fought tooth and nail in court, arguing that the public had a fundamental right to know exactly what was in those files, and more importantly, who was named in them. And you know what? That persistence paid off. In December of 2023, the legal dam finally broke. These long-hidden files were officially unsealed for the entire world to read, suddenly dragging hundreds of names right out of the shadows and into the public eye.
Part 4. Trump in the Files.
Now, one of the high-profile names that appeared in those unsealed documents was, in fact, Donald Trump. So, stripping away all the intense political noise for a second, let's look at exactly what a crucial 2009 witness testimony in these files actually reveals. During questioning, when a lawyer asked this witness point blank if Trump was ever at Epstein's private island, the witness explicitly said no. They did state that Trump flew on Epstein's private plane, but just one time, on a flight from Florida up to New York. And as for illegal activity, the witness stated Trump was not involved in any crimes. It's absolutely vital to emphasize this takeaway so we have a clear understanding of the historical record. Look, the files confirm what we honestly already knew. They ran in the same circles, and they were friends back in the 90s who went to the same parties. But, and this is a big but, the documents do not prove that Trump committed any crimes or had any part in Epstein's trafficking ring. The files definitely show a social connection, for sure, but they do not show complicity. For a little more context, it's worth looking at what Trump himself had to say about the timeline of their relationship. Way back in 2015, long before any of these files were unsealed, Trump publicly stated that he was not a fan of Epstein and that they had a falling out years prior. More specifically, Trump claimed he actually banned Epstein from his private club down in Florida because Epstein had behaved inappropriately toward a young woman. So, based on the historical record, it seems those 1990s social ties were eventually completely severed.
Part 5. Facts over fiction. As we wrap this up, let's just zoom out for a second. Beyond just the famous names involved, this whole saga gives us some really crucial takeaways. First, we undeniably see that wealth and power can shield people from consequences for years. Second, it was the sheer, unrelenting willpower of the victims and journalists that finally dragged the truth into the open. Third, when it comes to Donald Trump, the unsealed facts show his ties to Epstein were purely social, not criminal. And finally, perhaps the most profound lesson here, the truth is incredibly patient. We don't need to invent stories that aren't real, but we must also never ever ignore the hard facts.
So as we close the book on this explainer, we're kind of left to ponder this overarching reality. Jeffrey Epstein is gone, and the survivors are still healing. But the unsealing of these documents proved that while secrets might stay buried in the shadows of power for a very long time, the truth, well, it's always going to wait for its moment in the light. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive into the facts. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.